yourself a monster, giant, beast, Goliath, a rock any king with this rock in my sling up. I've been hunting all day, boy. I've been hunting all day.
Hello, my name is Robbie. On here I'm Templar Knight. Every person who believes in God but does not attend a church has a story why. But it's said that whenever two or more gather in God's name, that He is there. So this is church. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we are beginning our new series called Fearless, and it is a more direct study of King David the Great. And this is a little out of my comfort zone, but for the past few months, God has been pushing me in this direction. So if there's one thing I've learned is that when God pushes, send me. I'll go. So I've spent a decent amount of time in research preparing for this to really try and understand who David was. Not just the Bible kids story version of David, but who was he? What was his life like? So I figured if we're going to do this, we got to start at the very beginning, because it's a very good place to start. Before there was David, there were two key players in this story. First, there was the prophet Samuel. Samuel was a prophet of the Lord, which means God could speak to him. Samuel could hear God's voice, not directly God's voice, but he could hear a voice that came from the Lord. The second person was Saul. King Saul. Now, we just finished the 10 Commandments. We learned about when Moses led the Israelites out of slavery. This is about 4 or 5 generations of people after this. See, when Israel was freed, they wandered, and when they finally found where they were meant to go, they were a bit more tribal. They each had their groups, their colonies, their villages, where they lived. And the prophet Samuel anointed Saul to be the first king. And so Saul brought all of these tribes together and formed the nation of Israel. Now Saul was a big guy. He was a soldier type. He was a leader. But he wasn't that great. He had his struggles. He had his inner demons that were a very serious problem for him in his reign. He united the tribes to form the nation of Israel, but he wasn't a good leader. So the prophet Samuel came back to him, and he told him, Saul, because you have rejected the Lord's commandments, God now rejects you to rule over Israel. God has sent me to tell you that He is choosing a new king who will be better than you. Now Saul was pretty devastated by this, because he wasn't a bad guy. He just wasn't good at being a good guy. And hearing that he had lost God's favor, it was a wake-up call for him. And he really, really wanted to try. And he says, Samuel, I'm sorry. I understand that I've lost God's favor, but can I at least be king? Can you still come back and bless me in front of my people so that I can rule until God's new king comes forth? Can this be between us until the new king arrives? And so Samuel tells him, fine, we can do this. You are king in name only. You are no longer God's chosen to lead. And I will return one day. Well, where are you going? God is sending me to find the new king. So rule well until it is his time. And the prophet leaves. Poor Samuel. Having to tell the king, you are no longer God's chosen. But Samuel was a good prophet. He was a good servant of the Lord, and he conveyed the message, and Saul didn't kill him for it. Because Saul easily could have had his guards strike him down and just pretend, this didn't happen. But Saul knew. He knew you can't stand in defiance of the Lord. And so Samuel left to go forth to find Saul's replacement. Now, if this was a Disney movie, this is where we would meet the star of our show. There would be a rolling plains and some hills and some wheat, and you'd come upon a little boy sitting on a rock, playing his instrument, watching over sheep. Just a scrawny little kid. See, David was a shepherd. Now, the reason he was the shepherd is he was the youngest of 7 brothers. Now, the rest of his brothers, they were big, macho, manly brothers. They were big guys. David was a runt. He was a scrawny little kid. He was creative. He thought differently. He wasn't the typical soldier, the typical manly man you were brought up to be back then. He was a musician. And at such a young age, he was a prodigy. This boy could play music and write songs and sing like no one the world had ever known. But he was still just this little space cadet of a kid. Mind always off in the clouds. Can you imagine sitting at their table? The table of Jesse, his father. All 8 of these boys, 7 of them just strapping lads, and little David sitting there. Well, what did you do today, David? Oh, I tended the sheep. Oh, and I killed a lion. What? Yeah, I killed a lion. Now, can you imagine his brothers just sitting there, just this little goober? Hey, Dave, how did you kill a lion? Oh, it was pretty simple, actually. So I was just sitting there playing my lute, and this lion showed up, and he was gonna eat one of the sheep. So I got up and I walked over to it, and I punched it in the head, and I ripped open its jaws, and I got my sheep back. What? Yeah. I hit him in the head, and I took the sheep back. Okay. I mean, it's really not that awkward. I mean, I had to do it to a bear once, too. You killed a bear and a lion. Yeah, pretty much. Boys, leave your brother alone. But, Dad... Boys. David, I love you, son. And no one here is calling you a liar, because we don't lie in this house. But next time you kill a bear, next time you kill a lion, bring back his head to show your brothers. Just an everyday meal at the house of Jesse, father of David. Now, mind you, David's brothers, they probably mocked and ridiculed him quite a bit. And word got around about this boy who killed lions and killed bears, and his musical skills and his writing, his ability to sing. It spread that Jesse had an odd son. And as word got around, one day the prophet Samuel arrives in Bethlehem. Now Samuel, to say Samuel was just a prophet is a bit of an understatement, because Samuel was the prophet. Samuel was a rock star. Everybody knew this guy. Now mind you, this is before pictures and newspapers, but everyone knew what he looked like. And so when the prophet Samuel walked into town, you knew something major was happening. This is the guy who made the first king of Israel. And now he's arrived in Bethlehem. And he walks up and he says, I am looking for the house of Jesse, for the Lord has told me that that is where I shall find the next king. Did Samuel just say what I think he said? Because, Saul's got a temper, and that is treason. So they take Samuel to the house of Jesse to find and anoint the next king. And he is greeted at the door. And he walks up and he sees all of Jesse's sons. And he walks up to the first boy. Big strapping lad. Looks powerful, looks smart. He should make a good ruler. And so Samuel pulls out the holy oils so that he can anoint him king. And as he grabs it, he hears the voice of the Lord in his head and he says, This is not the one. Yes, Lord. And he looks to the next oldest. And he goes over to him to anoint him the next king. And he hears the voice. This is not the one. Yes, Lord. And he goes to the next son. And the next son. And he goes down the line from oldest to youngest of the 7 boys that were there. And he reaches the last one. This is not the one. And the prophet Samuel looks around. He says, So, do you have any other sons? What do you mean? I mean, do you have any sons who are not here right now? Because I was told the next king would be here, but none of these boys are him. Bro, is he talking about David? God, I hope not. And Jesse looks to him and says, I have one more son. He is a shepherd who tends to my flocks during the day. He is with the sheep. And Samuel sits down and he says, Bring him. We won't eat until he has arrived. I must meet this boy. So they send a runner and they bring home little 10, 12-year-old David with his lute and his shepherd's stick. Now, as a kid, a 12-year-old boy, if you walk in your home and everyone is staring at you, you don't know what you did yet, but you're pretty sure you done did something. And he walks in and he looks at them and he sees this man. Now, even he knows who Samuel is. He knows of the prophet. And he gets nervous. He's like, do you want me to play a song? Pulls out his lute and, no. I have been sent here because you are to be anointed as the next king of Israel. And the prophet kneels before the boy and he pulls out the holy oil. And you gotta think he's just sitting here waiting for the voice. Hello? Hey, God, I'm about to do it. God, this little scrawny, knobbly-kneed kid, here I go. And he pours the oil over his head, and he anoints him the next king of Israel. So what happens next? Well, not much. The prophet Samuel arises. He did what he came to do. he looks at them and says, "This is what the Lord sent me for. I must now return to do God's bidding." And he leaves. Just up and walks out, leaving them all here, looking at David, oil dripping through his hair. What do we do next? And of course, all the village elders are there trying to figure out what's going on. And they all know what happened. They all know that this oddball of the village has been deemed the next king. Well, they're not celebrating this. In fact, they don't want to talk about it. Because if there's one thing they know is that King Saul don't take kindly to treason. If King Saul finds out about this, they're pretty sure they're all going to get their village just wiped out. So they decide they're not going to talk about it. So the next day comes and everyone goes back to their normal life. Everyone just does their thing, pretending like it was just a weird dream. Hey, do you remember like a few months ago, did the prophet Saul really come here? Or am I misremembering that? And they just go back to life as normal. And years pass. And nothing changes. So now we're going to jump back to this angry, irritable, ill-tempered King Saul. Now mind you, he is the king only in name now. He's no longer anointed by God. He sits on the throne, he rules the people, but he is not God's chosen. And it eats at him. And it tears at him inside. And he doesn't know how to deal. And now war is coming. Philistine is coming for him. He can't focus. He can't keep his head together. He's struggled. The Bible says he fights with inner demons. When he sleeps at night, he sees horrors. And he's afraid, so he doesn't sleep. The less he sleeps, the more paranoid, the more angry he becomes. Until finally, someone at his camp says, you know, Saul, I've heard stories of this kid from a nearby village in Bethlehem, and from what I hear, he's the most amazing singer. He can play music. He is truly blessed by God with what he can do. Perhaps we should summon him and he can lull you into sleep at night. Now Saul is at his wit's end. He's freaking out. He's... Fine. Bring this kid. Let's see if he can help me rest. And so they send a runner. So here's David, back at home, growing up. He's a little older now. But he gets the summons that King Saul wants to see him at his campment. You mean the King Saul who I'm going to replace? Now, granted, he didn't say that. He knows better. But in his mind, he's thinking, did he find out? But David was fearless. If this kid can fight lions, if this kid can fight bears, he can face his king. Because mind you, David still believes that Saul is his king. And David is loyal to his nation. So he goes to the king. And when he shows up, he walks into the king's tent. And it's night and it's dark. There's only one lantern lit. And he sees the advisors around. And he walks in. And he sees the bed with the tarps draped over it. And they tell him to play. To help the king sleep. And so he does. And David's music It's peaceful. It's calming. It is heavenly. It is a song likes of which they have never heard before. It is God's grace in harmony. And he is able to help Saul sleep. Saul finds rest from this music. And David is shooed off to the baggage train to find a place to stay, to be out of the way, but to be nearby when he is needed the next night. And he plays, and he plays, and he plays. David was truly a musical prodigy, and his music could even calm King Saul's twisted, broken mind. Now that Saul can sleep, he can think clear, he can focus, he can regather his thoughts. And now he knows it is time for me to go to war. And so he packs up camp to go and meet the Philistine threat. And David goes home. I can't fully understand, I can't say I know for sure what David was thinking, but I can only imagine. He was told he would be the next king. And he was there, in the king's tent, around the king's people. He could have flat out there told them, hey, back in the day the prophet told me I was going to be the next king, so what's this guy doing? But he didn't. He did what he was told to do. And then he went back home. Because if there's one thing that David knew, is that things happen on God's time. And that's something we can relate in our lives. David knows that God has chosen him to be king. But they already have a king. So he's not taking action, he's not doing anything to earn this position to try and say, hey, I'm ready to be king now. He is trusting the Lord to tell him when it is time for him to be king. He is trusting God to tell him when his time will come. I don't know about you guys, but when I was reading about that hit me. Because sometimes I am prone to sit back and say, God, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this to happen. I want to do this. Is it time yet? Can we go? And I need to step back and trust that things will happen on God's time, not my own. I don't determine my path. David was 12 years old, and he already knew this. I wish I did sometimes. Anyway, David goes back to Bethlehem to be with his father, to be with his flock, to be with his sheep. And Saul leads his army. Now, David was just a kid, so he didn't get to join the army. But a handful of his brothers did. 4 of his brothers were old enough to fight, old enough to be soldiers, old enough to be in war. And they were built for it because they were manly men. They were tough. They were macho. David was a thinker. He was not macho yet. He hadn't grown into his body. He had potential, but he just wasn't there yet. So a few months pass, and Jesse looks to his youngest son and he says, David, I think it's time you go and check on your brothers. I know you know the way, because you've been to see Saul several times. Can you take a care package? Let's pack up some good meat and let's send it to the boys. Let's just go check on them, see how everything's doing. Can you do that for me, son? Yeah, Dad. I know the way. when King Saul summons me, I go and play, so I know how to find him. All right, now you be careful, though, because the Philistine army is out there. And we're at war with them, son, so you be careful. Find your brothers, deliver the food, check on them, and then come right back home. Okay, Dad, I got this. I can do this. So David loads up his backpack, loads up his walking stick. He's got the care package, all the extra food for his brothers. And he heads out. Now he knows where to get there, because when Saul summons him, he comes. So he's approaching where the Israelite camp is. He can tell when he's getting close. And he approaches the camp, and he finds his brothers. And he greets them with hugs and cheers. And he looks across the way and he sees the Philistines. He's like, how come we aren't fighting them? I thought we were at war. His brother looks at him and he says, they've got this champion who wants to fight this in the old way. Our best versus their best. And so for the last 40 days, he's come out and he's challenged us to send forth someone. He insults us. But no one will fight him. And David looks up. He looks across the battlefield, and he hears the war horn. And he hears the laughter echoing across the field. Is there no one who will face me? And David looks to his brothers in disgust. Why is no one going to fight him? This is God's army. And his brother looks to him. That man is a true warrior. He is a giant from Gath. His name is Goliath.
You can call yourself a monster, giant, beast, Goliath, a